when you think about it, the whole spiritual journey, the journey back to your true Santa, your true self, the natural self, at the core of your being, is basically just a journey of forgiveness. There is nothing else you need to do really than just forgive and let go of all sorts of negativity that you have picked up in this life, and even from past and present and future life connections that your higher mind is facilitating. But the point is, that's all you have to do. It's all about forgiveness. And Bashar has talked about this in recent sessions, where he has basically stressed the importance of just unconditionally forgiving absolutely everything as you are passing through this crucial eye of the needle time period. Because you cannot hold on to any grudge or grudges after you come out on the other side of the eye of the needle. That's the whole point. You have to find a way to just unconditionally let go and forgive whatever happened. And this is what is being squeezed up in people, and has been for a while now, for some years now. And this is also why we see the world going so crazy, and we also see all these totalitarian agendas sort of smoldering around. And some countries are fully on fire, but other countries, it's basically the totalitarian energies are smoldering underneath the surface and trying to get a foothold. So the reason for this is that we are all locked into a totalitarian regime within ourselves. That's the negative ego. The negative ego is like a parasitic entity who has positioned itself around, and it represses your true Santa, your true natural self. And it holds you in like a prison. And it sucks and feeds off of your life energy because of the fear that it generates by putting you in this condition. So it makes you fearful of death and fearful of many things, because you feel like a limited, isolated person in a dangerous world, instead of just beingness, which is beyond any fear like that. So everybody has this entity inside themselves, the negative ego, and it swarms around and surrounds and represses the natural self. And the whole journey of self-empowerment is to find back to your natural self, and this is done as you move around in karmic grooves according to your level of consciousness. You chip away, and a little bit here, a little bit there, and then you increase yourself gradually. You gravitate around your natural self, at a certain level, at a certain karmic groove. And then you get closer and closer to the core of the negative ego as you progress on your journey. And some people progress quick, and some people not so quick. But at some point you will get to the negative ego situation, which I have been through a lot the last couple of years now. Or actually for more than that. It started more than 10 years ago for me, but anyway, I talked about that in the last video. The point is, when this thing is coming up in so many people, at the same time it's reflected in the physical reality as the totalitarian tendencies and energies that are being played out in different countries. Australia is one of the worst countries now when it comes to totalitarian energies, and you also have other countries as well, but Australia has really gone full on. But you can also notice that it doesn't really take properly. They don't succeed. It was supposed to be completely like Australia, maybe even worse, for all countries, for the whole world at this point. But they're not really, it's not going according to what they planned, because too many people are waking up, and too many people have increased their level of consciousness. Now it's all a big mix-up of a large percentage of the population are basically begging for Big Brother to take care of them, and Big Brother government and totalitarian tyranny without even understanding what they're doing. And then you have all the people who are awake, who are fighting it, and they're sort of half awake, they're fighting it, and then the people who are more awake than that, they're actually working on themselves instead of fighting stuff in the mirror, basically. The people who are fighting the regime, or at least they are necessary in a certain sense, but I wouldn't recommend it, because what truly helps is to actually dismantle the whole thing inside yourself, because everything is a collective projection of all the stuff that goes on inside people. And negative ego, it puts you in a straitjacket, kind of. You know, your natural self is in a straitjacket, is in a rigid, repressed state because of this setup. So at some point you're gonna have to let go of all that, and an important part of doing that, you have to let go of all the past pain and all the past times you've been wronged and whatnot, at least in your perception. So the whole point is that first you have to forgive. It's one thing to forgive, something happened, somebody did something. Okay, you forgive it after a while. That's one thing. But what I'm talking about here is more fundamental, because you have to at some point forgive not only your parents for not loving you unconditionally, because that's why everybody have major issues with their parents. At least part of the reason is because the parents didn't have what it takes to love their child unconditionally, which almost no parents do, because they themselves have never experienced that, and they don't know what that is and how that is possible. So they basically just repeat more or less what happened to them, what their parents did. And so that's a fundamental forgiveness, forgiving your parents for not being unconditionally loving. And then after that, you also have to basically forgive God and the higher mind, or whatever you want to call it, for putting you in this situation, kind of. You've been dropped down here from the 5D, fifth density, heavenly spirit realm, in which everything is unconditionally loving, because that's the nature of reality. And then you drop down here and you sort of fragment into a mind and all that, and the mind is full of resistances and fragments that says no to life, because at the core of your being you have the negative ego, which is basically a big, massive resistance to life and to the natural self. And when everything is built on top of this negative ego, the whole personality structure, it becomes filled with all sorts of resistances, fragments and fragmented resistances. And all of these things, as you let go of them, they put you in a karmic, gravitational groove, you might call it, like a karmic groove that you gravitate around your natural self according to your level of consciousness. And then if you work on yourself effectively and you let go of major things, you can progress quickly to different grooves as you take yourself higher, closer and closer to the higher levels, and closer to the negative ego core. And then once you can forgive God and forgive yourself and forgive whatever, for actually being put in a situation where there's so much pain and suffering, then finally you can let go of the whole negative ego situation. That's not easy, and I got help from ETs for doing this in my situation, and I'm guessing a lot of other people are also getting help. Not everybody gets help that is necessarily the same way that I do. You get to talk to these beings and whatnot. Some people probably just get help behind the scenes, or they just work on them in the night time or in dream time, and it depends on what's required. But everybody who is supposed to be part of the ascension, they will get some kind of assistance, whatever they need from the higher mind ET levels. And then at some point you will be able to let go of and forgive basically everything, and that takes you into enlightenment. That takes you, if you can let go of the negative ego, which is basically a clusterfuck of all sorts of dense and negative energies, some of them picked up from parents and some from different lifetimes, both past, present and future, and some from the general mass consciousness, and some of your own. There's basically a lot of stuff in there, that layers upon layers of negative stuff, and that becomes like an entity of its own, with its own kind of life, sort of trying to perpetuate itself like everything does. And it feeds off of fear and negativity, and self-righteousness is very powerful energy. If you can appeal to that in people, the negative ego loves it, because when you're self-righteous, which is an inflamed state, you can basically justify almost anything, like you see people do in all sorts of situations nowadays, with when everything is so split apart. So that's one, self-justification. As long as you have, you feel like you're justified, that you have the right to do whatever you're doing, you can justify just about anything, and you can make people do all sorts of horrible stuff because they think it's justified. And it's all part of the negative ego's clever tricks. It has many, many tricks in its book, and it will use them all to try to make you do its bidding, basically, and create more negativity and give it more food. So the whole spiritual journey is basically, as I said, is about forgiveness. First, you have to let go of more superficial resistances and stuff, fragmented stuff in your mind. And this takes you a little bit up the scale of consciousness, and then you come to the final boss, like in a computer game, which is the negative ego, the core. And that can take years, or it can take, who knows, it can vary a lot from person to person, but that can be quite rough. But that is where we are now. That is why it's so much craziness in the world, because it's the final death throes, it's the final battle with this entity on an individual level, which reflects in the collective too. Because if enough people can do that, like millions of people, for example, and maybe even less than that, a critical mass, that is enough to unravel the whole collective negative ego system in a major way. It can't really survive in an environment where too many people have reached unconditional love and beyond. It becomes very hard for that kind of situation, that kind of energies to survive, or in that much light. It's always hiding in the shadows, doesn't want to be seen, because that basically kills it. It's like a vampire. It can't tolerate sunlight or the light of awareness. So that's the whole clusterfuck situation that we're dealing with, many people are dealing with these days. And I don't think it's going to go on for too much longer, actually. I think we're going to see big things in 2023. We have one more year now, 2022, to wrap it up, get more people through it. But at some point we're going to accelerate really quickly. When enough people have gone through this, I think you're going to see development physically in the 3D of world rapidly change once we come through the first most difficult phase of this whole process. And I mean, it's difficult to forgive sometimes because the negative ego makes you feel worthless. It makes you feel like you don't even have the right to exist. It makes you feel like you have no power. That's what it does, because it represses your natural self, which you wouldn't feel any of that if the natural self was free to express itself and be in its natural state. But since it's not, it makes you feel powerless. It makes you feel like a victim. It makes you feel like you have no value. It ties directly into your self-worth. And that ties directly into forgiveness too, because basically whatever happened that you can't forgive is always tied into your self-worth. Your self-worth has been or is basically your negative ego, the inflamed situation, has been touched by something, and that reminds you of your lack of self-worth, or how you feel that you have no self-worth because of this situation. But normally the situation is sort of hidden underneath all sorts of layers, so you don't necessarily think about it and feel that way all the time. But when it's touched, which something can happen, and can touch it, and then you get that reminder that, oh shit, I have no self-worth, because that's how I really feel deep inside. But even deeper inside, you actually have endless self-worth. It's just that it's repressed by the negative ego that people are hiding, for themselves. So the whole personality structure built on top of it is like a cage or a buffer zone, so you don't have to sort of face and feel horrible all the time. Because that's how I've felt for 10 years now, or a long time now. Because I've been in touch with the negative core of the ego so long, I've felt like shit. Feel like really shitty, and especially compared to how I used to feel before, when I was in the 500s, high 500s in the beginning, which I felt amazing. And then suddenly, you get a decade of feeling like shit. It's a big contrast, put it that way. And it's also unexpected if you didn't know anything about it. But that's why it's so difficult to forgive, because it ties directly into your self-worth. You feel that your self-worth has been diminished, or and how can you take that back? Most people, they will act out and attack the person who they feel have diminished their self-worth, right? That's the natural, that's what you see all the time. Somebody does something and the other person takes revenge or attacks or whatever, in physically or psychologically or whatever it will be. That's the whole, it's been a game that's been going on for a long time. That game has to come to an end if we are going to graduate into a higher density, into 4D, and be in contact with ETs on a higher level. We can't be playing that game anymore, which means you have to stop the karmic wheel by forgiving unconditionally and completely. And this is rough. This is not easy. Believe me, I know. I've been, through it for a long time now. I've been a long process for me. I'm finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel now, after 10 years and of craziness. And but that's what it is. I mean, how can you take back your self-worth without taking revenge or attacking or hating the person you feel have wronged you? Well, there is no other way than number one, you have to accept that whatever that person did, it really no matter how bad it was or whatever, it really is your core issue, your negative ego, your inflamed situation that makes you feel like you feel. It doesn't matter what that person or these people or whatever did to you. What makes you feel shitty is the negative core ego inflamed situation that's repressing your natural state, your natural self. That is the only thing that makes you feel like that. It has nothing to do with whatever anyone did. This is the big lesson I've learned the really hard way by going through all this. So that is the only way. You have to stop focusing on whatever happened and the story of what happened and who did what, and simply accept that I'm feeling shitty, not because actually they helped you, that person helped you to get in touch with something that you might otherwise not be in touch with, namely the inflamed core ego. So in a way you can say that even if they did something bad, they actually helped you to get in touch with that, so you can actually start to work on that and chip away on it, and eventually unravel the whole negative ego and let it go and forgive completely. So that is the only way. If you can accept that responsibility, then you have come a long way in forgiving unconditionally. And this is easier when you have already been in the level of unconditional love, of course, because then you've sort of have experience with what that means. You have felt and experienced unconditional love in yourself, and you're sort of ready to take on the final fight with the negative core, which is basically a very wounded child. That's what the core is. It's a very wounded child. Because as a child you're wide open beingness. You're basically in the enlightened state as a baby. There's nothing closed up or nothing saying no to life in a baby, right? The baby is wide open. And then all that negativity that comes from your parents not unconditionally loving you, and from this general mass consciousness not being unconditionally loving, like the fifth density heaven realms, all that combined creates the clusterfuck core negative ego inflammation. And so basically you're dealing with a very wounded child, which is keeping people in a halfway childish state too. Even as adults, they have this inner child, as they call it. But it's not really a cute inner child. It's actually a inner tyrant, inner very wounded, inflamed, raging, angry child. It's not really the cute thing that many New Age people make it seem like. That's what the negative core ego is, and it wants revenge. That's basically what it wants. Revenge, just like a villain in movies. It wants to see the whole world burn because it feels horrible. So it wants to see that suffering projected onto everything and everybody in the whole world. It wants to see the world burn, and it wants revenge on God and revenge on existence and on the higher mind or whatever. It basically wants revenge. And I've been feeling on this thing for a long time. I've been studying it for years. I've been going through it step by step or layer by layer. So I have a pretty good idea what it is and how it works. And that becomes the core of your personality, which becomes a very artificial and rigid personality, structure compared to the natural self, which will be very much more flowing and in the moment, and much more able to change and adopt and to whatever situation arises. While most people are basically frozen bricks of ice, just can't help themselves to be what they are. They have no ability to adopt to. Many people you see that they're really rigid and they are the way they are. They can't really help it, and that's what the personality straitjacket they have been, put on them. How it works. Well, an enlightened teacher, they are always extremely in the moment and always extremely flowing and seamlessly adapting and adjusting themselves to whatever situation, whatever the situation requires. It's a completely different way of being, and you can't even compare almost to what's considered normal in this world. And I don't really know if I have anything more to say about this subject at this point, but the point is, the whole journey is about forgiveness, because forgiveness means you letting go of energies that you're holding on to, negative energies that you're holding on to. You're letting them go, and thereby you're freeing yourself bit by bit, all the way back to the core of the situation, what started it all basically, which is the negative ego core. And if you can let go of all that, then you're free. Then you have found back to your freedom.